This is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Welcome back to our show. I'm so glad to have Peter Jussi back with us. He's going to talk about U.S. foreign policy challenges. Peter, would you please continue by talking about drug smuggling and immigration?
Thank you, Sandra. One of the issues, immigration, is very controversial because if you talk about wanting to limit immigration, you're considered anti-immigrant. And I say that as a first-generation American whose parents came here from Nazi Germany, and their parents, the day Hitler came to power. They left. They'd planned to leave. And in those days, the Nazis were kicking people out but you had to have a sponsor, and to come to America, you had to know English, and luckily my grandfather was a professor of law and knew English. He knew like 8 languages. So we were lucky. This is not anti-immigrant. The second issue is drugs. And here is much more serious. It is not a partisan issue. We should understand when 107,000 people died last year in America from opiate addiction. 70%, about 70,000 from fentanyl. What's the connection to China? China produces the precursor chemicals that is made into fentanyl by Mexican cartels. There's no mystery. They're not finding the precursor chemicals on the street. They're not buying them from a shadowy, unknown source. They know they're coming from China. China knows what it's doing, and China has a name for it. They call it the reverse opium wars. Where, as you know in history,
That's right.
the Chinese have always thought that the British, among others, had used opium dens in China to addict the Chinese people and harm the country and weaken it, so that the colonial powers could basically use China as a economic source of raw materials and exclude the Chinese from being able to have a say in their future. And we would then give them their checks, but only when they returned to Jamaica. So we didn't have a problem with illegal immigration. They came in legally. They had a work permit. Well, that's not true. We have seasonal agriculture workers, but wait a minute. If we have 14 to 20 million illegal aliens in this country, 4 or 5 million of them are children. They're not all working in agriculture, okay? And if they're going to school and costing $20,000 per student per year, there's no way these people illegally, I don't care what they're working for, are not paying enough to pay their way through school. And the Supreme Court ruled in the 1980s that we owed an education to people in this country, even if they're here illegally. MIT and Yale did a study saying we have at least 20 million illegal aliens here. And this is before the fact that in the last 2 years, a lot of Americans don't know this, people watching, 5 million people came into this country illegally. And everybody says, oh, well, they were stopped at the border. The assumption is they were returned to where they came from. But they came from 160 different countries. Almost none of them were returned. We deported like 16,000 people, maybe 25,000 people a year. Most are given a notice and said, come to a hearing about your asylum claim, because all of them are claiming asylum, even though it's bogus.
Right.
And then they get a note and they get a cell phone. It can't call Mongolia, but what it is a cell phone that we can contact them and say, your hearing is on such and such a day, but in 2025, because the backlog is so huge. So they get to stay in America, and we pay Catholic Charities, among other groups, to take care of them. So we don't know if they're working, we don't know whether, but they're getting assistance. They can get food stamps, they can get health care. So they're all over the country. We found out that there were more Chinese Communist Party military officers getting PhDs in advanced science degrees in America than there were Americans. Talking about 2,500 that Trump expelled. because we found out, guess what? They're all PLA officers. They're all military. They're spies. They are getting degrees.
At Harvard.
Right. That's crazy. We should encourage Americans to get these degrees because we have an enormous shortage, true, of very highly qualified people. Whether it's the nuclear business or missile defense or space or high tech, industry is having a hard time finding qualified people. This immigration problem, we have 5 million people came into this country illegally in the last 2 years that we caught. Most of them, 99%, we didn't send home. In fact, the administration is kind of massaging the numbers by allowing someone to be paroled into the country and become legal, for which they can get a green card, which is a card to work, and they then are no longer subject to deportation, which most of these 5 million are not. And on top of which, you have 1 million legally coming in a year, a little over 1 million, but then you have what is called gotaways. The smugglers are very smart, $20,000 to $40,000 a pop for these people. They flood the area where the Border Patrol have to come in and basically check them in, say, what's your name? They write them, and then you can see them, and they're all waiting in line, like waiting for a bus at Grand Central Station. And while they're doing that, you see over in the distance hundreds of illegal aliens coming through with nobody touching them at all. Those are gotaways. And the estimate is there are at least 600,000 a year. So multiply by 2 years and you're up over 1 million people with no idea who they are. Now, it's interesting, either the New York Times, look at the New York Times recently had an article saying that the people coming into this country are not just people looking for work, they're criminals, escaping criminal justice in their own countries. I want to make this clear. Critics say, oh, you're calling illegal immigrants criminals because you don't like them. You don't like immigrants because they're people of color or something. No. These are people that are escaping criminal justice in their own countries. And they think, well, if I'm in a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state in America, or no one will come after someone because their status as an illegal alien, well, it's better than being in Honduras or El Salvador or Brazil where the authorities are going to come and get me and lock me up. So we're finding more and more. And then on top of which, immigration, the customs people and the Border Patrol, and I'm talking about people they catch, over hundreds of these people are on international terrorism watch lists. What are the odds? These are people, they're not coming in by, we've also got another problem. People come in by airplane and they have a legal visa, but then the visa expires and they don't go home. They're called overstays. Now, Congress passed a law and Bill Clinton signed it into law in 1998, I believe, saying develop a program to finding out who are overstays. We, to this day, over 20 some odd years, almost 25 years ago, we have not developed such a system. The tourism industry, the airlines, the travel agents, oh, no, we can't do that. We don't have the authority a capability to do it. So we're just going to let people come here. Now, of the 9/11 hijackers, my understanding is 12 were overstays. Mohammed Atta overstayed his visa. But when he was arrested twice for traffic violations by police officers, they could not check his immigration status because Ted Kennedy, as a senator, got adopted as part of the immigration laws, a prohibition. Local police could not act as immigration officers and check the immigration status of an individual they stopped for a routine traffic stop or arrested for anything else. So we could have arrested Mohammed Atta, and finding his immigration status had lapsed. He was violating he was overstaying his visa, arrested him on the spot and turned him over to ICE and immigration and deported him back to where he was from. Mohammed Atta goes back to where he came from. 9/11 doesn't happen. The war in Afghanistan doesn't happen. The war in Iraq doesn't happen. 4,000 American soldiers don't get killed. A couple $1 trillion worth of expenditures don't get spent. We don't end up in this endless war thing. Why? Because Ted Kennedy said it was anti-immigrant to check the immigration status of someone who's arrested for, let's say, a routine traffic violation or shoplifting or any other crime. Nobody in the drive-by media will tell you this because it then says, boy, that was a dumb thing to do. Because Congress said in 1998 deal with overstays, and the administration was design a law, design a system that takes care of this, come back to Congress.
And this has never come back on the table.
When Trump tried to do it, the thing about let's not bring people in from countries of concern, that's Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, countries where terrorism happens to be part and parcel of state sponsors, okay? And that was considered, you're anti-Muslim. And this is a very touchy system because we've allowed the open borders people to establish the narrative, which is if you want to stop, you could do E-Verify. That means if I hire you, so what's your social security number? I can punch it in just like a credit card, and I can be told by the Social Security Administration, your social security number you gave me is bogus. I can't hire you. Now, the Wall Street Journal, they go crazy. They say, you don't want businesses to be cops. They can't be investigating your status. Well, when I give you a credit card and it's bogus, what do? Do you investigate to see if the card is, why? No, you give it back to me and said the card was declined. I can't take it. Well, if it comes back, your social security number is bogus, and you're not, according to the Social Security boys and girls, eligible to be hired, you got to go figure it out with Social Security. It's not my business. Okay? So business doesn't have to have that role, and no one is proposing that it does. But if you did E-Verify, and you did employer sanctions, and you had reasonable work permit program, which expires in a year, and so people have to go home and then reapply, let's say, for a year extension. And if you trained American in trade schools and got them off their duffs and not sitting in the basement watching video games, and the number of Americans now working, I believe, is roughly equal to the number in December 2019 prior to COVID. But we've had 3 years of population growth, 3 years of immigration, legal immigration. So we've added a lot of people to the workforce that should work, okay? Now, all immigrants coming in aren't workers. Some are kids because they're families and they're going to school. But I've added up all the numbers. Illegal immigration costs us about $400 billion a year in lost wages, in costs of school, and benefits from welfare to Medicaid to food stamps. And that's because once people come in legally or illegally but are given the right to get assistance, they apply for it, okay? And we have this crazy system in America. In Maryland, where I'm from, a mother with 2 children can take home the equivalent of $34,000 a year cash. That's not very much, granted, but it means she has to make $50,000 to take home that. Well, then you say, well, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. And she goes out and gets a job. Well, $15 an hour is what she's going to have to pay the babysitter for daycare. What does she live on? All her benefits go taken away. Now, the idea is, what about stepping down benefits as you step up your income so that overall you're doing, the more you work, the better you are? Well, I have a congressman friend who's introduced such a bill. The Democrats come back and say, this step down now, we want to take it out so you can make $80,000 a year and then step down your benefits. Well, that means never. It means, yes, you can go work, but you won't lose any benefits. As opposed to gradually eliminate benefits but we have the earned income tax credit, we have the child tax credit. We help people basically defray their payroll tax, because 49% of Americans who work do not pay federal income taxes. They pay Social Security and Medicare, but they don't pay federal income taxes. So we've already taken almost half the country off the income tax rolls. So when you say tax cuts, for half Americans, it doesn't mean any benefit to them. That's how screwy our system is. And my view is, get every elderly person in America that would like to go back to work, but doesn't want to get hit with because their retirement money, it'd be added to their income, salary, they'd be in a tax bracket way, way up there. And the question is, what about reducing that tax bracket to no higher than they are already? And say half your income you make after retirement, if you want to go to work, we'll tax it at half the rate. Or we won't tax Social Security or Medicare when you're 75 or 80, as a way of encouraging 10, 15, 20 million Americans to go back to work so revenue can come into Uncle Sam so we can get this deficit down to zero and then start paying back the debt, which is what, $32 trillion at the moment. I mean, we can get very creative about putting people to work as opposed to, what in the name of God? We pay people to be on welfare so they don't work. Then we bring in illegal aliens, many of whom work off the books.
That's right.
And don't pay taxes so they can lower the wages and compete with Americans. If I went to Congress and said, I guess it's a great idea, Senator, we're going to bring in illegal aliens working off the books, don't pay taxes, and Americans that should be working, they're going to go home, sit in the basement watching TV and getting welfare payments and having children out of wedlock, he would say, you belong in an insane asylum. But that's the system we have. And then if you want to get right and get married or get a job, for a woman who's got children, the husband or father is not allowed in the house, okay? Now, true, I have a sister who deals with child family problems, and she says, some of the guys, you don't want them around. Okay, understood. But why would you say to a woman, get married, get a job, and oh, by the way, we'll punish you for doing that and wipe out most of your benefits? That's the craziest thing in the history of man. Now, when you have immigration the way it is today, and you don't know who's coming into the country. Remember, only 19 terrorists or 18 terrorists took down the World Trade Center and flew a plane into the Pentagon, and God forbid the third plane didn't get where it was going to go into the Capitol or into the White House. It only takes 19 people to do that. What do you think 5 million people might do because you don't vet people? It's like, I'm going to invite a whole lot of people for dinner, but I have no idea who they are. And oh, by the way, they're going to hang out in the basement while everybody else leaves. It's the stupidest thing in the world when we should know who it is. Immigration, by their definition, is we invite you. You say, I'd like to come, and we say yes. People who are illegally in this country are not immigrants. They're aliens. And that's not a bad word. My grandmother for years was a resident foreign alien until she, after 25 years, decided to apply for American citizenship, and she was accepted. So we have to use words right. And part of the open borders crowd is there are people who believe America is an evil country, a bad country, and therefore we're obligated to open up our borders to third world countries whom we oppressed. And I'm not joking. This is serious when you read the literature in the open borders people, and it's not an Hispanic thing. It was for many years the question of agriculture workers from Mexico, but with overstays and 160 countries being represented in the illegal flows today, and terrorists on the terrorist watch list coming in, this is not an Hispanic issue. Not at all. It is an issue, do we want to have sovereignty or not? And China would be delighted to see us overwhelm our cities and our areas with people who are not supportive of our Constitution or our American way of life. And there is an American way of life we should be proud of and stop being embarrassed about, what are we defending? We are defending America's Republican constitutional form of government, which is unique in the world. We're supporting freedom and liberty and due process and freedom of speech and our Bill of Rights, which every time you turn around, there's someone trying to take away those rights. And that is the danger we're facing, okay? And China is perfectly happy to weaken us along this line, whether immigration or drugs. And we have the power to stop it, and we have to, because 107,000 people dying, that's more than all the American soldiers that died in Vietnam and Korea combined in 11 years of war. They're dying every year in America. Korea was 35,000, Vietnam was 58,000. You add it up, it's about 95,000 American soldiers died in the wars combined. More than that die now every year just from opiate addiction.
And we're changing our social fabric by making drugs okay.
Well, now we understand. A New York Times reporter recently, he retired, and his wife is a child psychiatrist, which my dad was. She has determined that marijuana use in your teens, because they're putting so much junk in it, okay, is leading to psychotic outbreaks in their 20s. And now we keep making marijuana legally available in many states, and you're seeing a crime wave come out of that. And I know this is going to get a lot of people upset who are making tons of money on, I don't want to put people in jail for using marijuana. I want to put the drug dealers in the slammer. But I also, as my dad was specialized in helping children that were alcoholics and drug addicts, that's what he did his entire life, is making more drugs available that all they do is make you stupid and lethargic. And now with that TCP, whatever they call it, TCH in the marijuana, and fentanyl, is we're killing kids and we're making them psychotic. And I don't understand if people think, would you like your airline pilot or your surgeon to have a puff on a couple, tokes on a marijuana cigarette before they go do their job? And if the answer is no, I don't think so, why in the name of God are we encouraging the use of this junk? I never used it as a kid. My dad was pretty smart. He took us to various psych wards where he worked and said, this is what happens to kids who use drugs, whether it was speed or whether it was LSD or whether it was marijuana. In those days, Coke wasn't big at all. But he said, this stuff is dangerous. It's like putting a gun to your head with one bullet in the chamber and spinning the dial, and you don't know whether you're going to come out with a terrible, terrible trip and screw up your brain. And that we're doing this, we're doing it and saying it's a cool thing. It's crazy. I mean, it's, again, self-destructive behavior. We're not just doing it at the individual level, we're doing it as a country. And my view is immigration and drugs, they're both part of the same company. The drug dealers in Mexico are using the immigration system, which is wide open and porous, to bring in drugs. But they're also smuggling these people in they're not just workers.
The mules.
They're sex workers.
Oh.
They're selling women and children into the sex trade, and I'm talking about children. Okay, it's bad enough that the children get exploited in child labor in Zambia and mines in China, okay? But when we're bringing children in this country who get raped at the rate of like 60, 70%, young girls are being raped on their travel from the Mexican border with Guatemala up through Mexico, okay? And we know that. I mean, supporters of the open border have said it's terrible that this is going on. And the question is, then why are you letting it go on? Mothers are giving their little girls contraceptives so they don't get pregnant on the way up because they're being smuggled by the cartels and they're brutalized on the way up. And that alone, try to find that story on CBS Evening News or what I call MSLSD. Okay?
And by the way, isn't Venezuela financing a lot of this stuff?
Yes,
with
we're having
their oil money.
Well, yes, it's kind of weird is that we end up with countries are perfectly happy to be part of smuggling rings because it's enormously profitable. Okay? The numbers are in the hundreds of billions of dollars that people are making both drug smuggling and people smuggling. And when people are coming here from Ghana and Bangladesh, you have to get to South America. Someone's paying an enormous amount of money, and then they're walking up through, coming up by caravans. Those caravans are blessed by the governments in question, because they could shut them down tomorrow. Everybody's making money on this, and the only people who are getting in the shorts are the American worker and the American taxpayer. And we're seeing our communities. We saw what meth did to our communities, starting in Washington and Oregon and going southeast. We saw what it did to our country, where entire communities were destroyed. Marriage rates went down, birth rates went down, family formation went down, unemployment skyrocketed. Why are we doing that to ourselves? That's crazy. And we do now have a senator who wrote Hillbilly Elegy, Mr. Vance from Ohio, who understands that. And I think you always hope that somebody's going to wake up in United States Congress and the administration, and this is not necessary. None of this helps us. Some people are getting rich, true, but this does not help our country as a whole. And if you're a patriot, which I think most Americans are, and you care about the future of the country we're leaving our children, we should stop this. And we have the power in our own hands to regulate immigration compassionately and smartly and stop the drug trafficking and rebuild our communities and make the American dream open to
And
every
look
American.
ourselves in the eye
Yes,
and recognize it.
yes. This is deadly serious. As I said, I've been working this since 1975. You know, they call it part of the culture wars, but it has to do with our sovereignty and our safety, and both of which we as Americans have an
And our
obligation.
pocketbooks, which
Oh,
are
yes,
being drained.
absolutely.
It's not adding to our economy, it's detracting from our economy.
Yes, yes. And we think of all the sacrifice that people made to build this country. And I mean sacrifice, I mean not just soldiers. I mean diplomats and aid workers and first responders who have given of their time and often their lives, or the firemen or policemen or whatever, to make a civilized country and make it work. And all the things they've done generation after generation after generation, the fights we had to preserve civil rights and the right of women to vote and then cleaning up the environment, all of which made America better. Those people deserve our respect to say, we're not going to throw it all away. And with drugs and open borders and the crime you see in the cities and the lack of energy production, where OPEC now has us around the neck by a leash, which we could take away by just producing 3 more million barrels a day, which we have the capability of doing. Why would you give people the ability to yank you around? It's crazy. Yes.
Peter, I want to thank you so much. You've been wonderful.
Well, thank you. I hope your audience learned something.